Welcome, you're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. This year marks the 85th anniversary of the Holodomor, which the Soviet authorities carried out in 1932 and 1933 in Ukraine. The Holodomor was an artificial famine induced by Stalin's regime. It is considered to be one of the most devastating events in the 20th century. Now, Ukraine continues to lobby for international recognition of the Holodomor as genocide. To talk more about this, we welcome to the studio today Stefan Romaniw. He is the General Secretary of the Ukrainian World Congress and Chair of the International Holodomor Commemoration Committee. Hello and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So this year on September 1st there has been an event launched called Light a Candle of Remembrance, and it's done throughout the world to commemorate the memory of those who perished during the artificial famine in 1932-1933 in Ukraine. How's it going so far? How many countries, how many members of the international community have actually taken part in this event?
Well, the genesis of that was to raise awareness. As you know, the motto is Ukraine remembers, the world acknowledges. In 2008, 10 years ago, we had a similar activity, which was the Candle of Remembrance, which visited different countries. This time we had over 40 countries. It started on September the 1st, visited different countries, started in Kyiv, will finish in Kyiv on Saturday. It's been very effective because what it's done is brought communities together, raised awareness. Its purpose is, in the first instance, to remember, but also to introduce non-Ukrainians to the whole issue of the Holodomor. Many people now know, I mean 80% of Ukrainians now know about Holodomor. Now we also know that the international community does. So we have, more recently, the US Congress and Senate committees are looking at a resolution on Holodomor. Portugal introduced a resolution on Holodomor as genocide. It's been a great activity in terms of raising awareness, incorporating non-Ukrainians into the issue of Holodomor, and also has led to a number of countries recognising Holodomor as genocide.
The Holodomor as a genocide, or Holodomor in general, has been a hidden fact of Ukrainian history and of the world history for such a long time. And nevertheless, a lot of countries are recognizing it nowadays. I mean, states, the United States of America, currently, if I'm not mistaken, we have 21 states who officially recognize the Holodomor as the genocide. We also have European countries. However, there are still documents that are classified. So how much do we actually know about Holodomor right now?
I think we know a lot. I think the fact that the SBU had opened up its archives, the story that the Russians tried to say in Soviet times, that this was not a man-made famine, that this was an issue that was an economic issue and so on. All that has been now diffused. The world knows, the documents are there. We see conferences happening around the world. And the important thing is to understand why it's important for us to know about the Holodomor. The Holodomor, for Ukrainians, obviously it's a tragic part of history, but also for the world needs to understand that what one man can do to another. If we want a better world tomorrow, then we have to, in a sense, recognise the fact there was a Holodomor. We need to hold those, the system, accountable. Obviously, Stalin's dead. We can't say anything about that, but we do have people ultimately who have to take responsibility for this, and our position has always been that we shouldn't sweep things under the carpet. The fact is, it was a tragedy. It was aimed at the Ukrainian nation. It wanted to eradicate the Ukrainian nation. The facts are there. The archives have been now opened, and the world now knows. I mean, if you look at the conferences that are happening in Kyiv this week, for example, if you look at the conferences that are happening around the world, it was genocide. The question, our role, for example, in the Ukrainian World Congress, working with the Ukrainian government, is to make sure that we try and get it recognised as genocide in different countries throughout the world. And I think many of the countries have been very receptive because they've understood that this is an atrocity against mankind. In terms of genocide, we know that Lemkin coined that term, genocide. We have people, the Russian disinformation continues now, trying to belittle Lemkin.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to ask. Do we raise awareness about the Holodomor as the genocide just because we want the whole world to know the real facts about Ukrainian history, or do we do it in the light of Russian aggression and fake news and Russian propaganda that is being spread around the world?
No doubt. No doubt.
Okay.
Not only in 2018. From day one, the Russian propaganda, whether it be Stalin, whether it be Kaganovich, whether it be the Durantes of the world, there were people who not only hid this fact, they denied it. They tried to say that it didn't happen. We know that they lied. They're liars, and they need to be exposed for that. We have the Vatican, for example. There's a book that's out about the Vatican, what the Vatican knew and what did it do. It's one thing, for example, your Durantes who lied, basically lied. There were others, including governments and the Vatican and others, that did very little initially to try and rectify this whole situation. So the Russian propaganda about it not being, President Yanukovych, for example, is a good example. I had meetings with President Yanukovych. I asked him a straight question.
Please do tell.
Yeah, I asked him a question like this. I said, you might be a president of Ukraine, but you're not a Ukrainian president, because a Ukrainian president would not deny the fact that Holodomor was genocide. And I asked him a simple question. At that time, when Canada had recognised Holodomor as genocide, and when Prime Minister Harper comes to Ukraine, what are you going to say to him? What are you going to say on behalf of the Ukrainian nation? He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to respond. And my response to him was, you see, if you and Putin and Vadu and your mates in Kazakhstan and that, you do one thing. You got to say that the system, the communist system, the Soviet system was responsible for this. You need to do that, and he would never do that. And again, we know how all that finished off. So the Russian propaganda, the fake news, the belittling of this, why do people are passionate about this? I had the privilege of looking at some of the archives, the SBU archives, and I told this story last week. When you read the story of a mother who tells you that they came in, they demanded all our food. She had a small child. They confiscated all the food, and on the way out, they saw some bowls and some cups, and they smashed those. And their response was, even if you're hiding food, you won't be able to put anything in it. So, it was disgusting. It needs to be called out for what it is, and I think Ukrainians, and the international community is doing that.
Looks like Ukraine's been doing a pretty good job, keeping the rest of the world aware of what the Holodomor actually was and who was the reason it started in Ukraine, who actually orchestrated it. Now, what do we do to make it even more exposed to the international community?
Look, under President Yushchenko's rule, we went to the president and said, this needs to be an ongoing process. It needs to be a campaign. That's why the term Ukraine Remembers, because we had to think about raising awareness in Ukraine, because there was a high percentage of people in Ukraine who didn't know the facts about the Holodomor.
That's horrible.
The world acknowledges, we need to get that recognised. So that process started under his presidency. Now, what do we have to do? We need to continue to bring this to the forefront. And how are we doing that? This was only one campaign, the 85 days of Light the Candle. But for example, we've spoken to Ukraine's permanent representative at the United Nations, Mr. Yelchenko, and said that, again, we need that campaign in the United Nations. And how have we attacked that? In the United Nations, what happens is that there's three categories of countries. There are those that will vote for Ukraine in any resolution. They'll fight those who vote against. And there's a very high number that abstain. And the reason they abstain is because they don't want to offend Russia, or they don't want to offend Ukraine. So we've been working with some of those in terms of raising awareness in those countries. The other thing we've done is, this issue of the Holodomor, a lot of the survivors have now passed away. In some countries, like, for example, in Australia recently, we had a Holodomor photo exhibition where we had headshots of the people who were still survived, who were still alive. Obviously, there aren't many. But what we've done is we're now initiating the Children of the Survivors group. In other words, what we're hoping that group will do, and we have interest in it, is do two things. That they will now carry the baton. They will keep the flame because they have a genuine interest in this because their parents or grandparents or great grandparents were involved. And what we're hoping is that we would also create a NGO, a non-government organisation in the United Nations and get a proper status where this issue would constantly, it's like a journey. We have to continue to make sure that this is at the forefront. Some people say, well, you know, why it's history, why don't forget history? You can't forget this part of history. This is an atrocity. This is a crime against humanity. And if we were to forget this, then, you know, we'd do a real injustice to those people who went through that Holodomor and perished.
Thank you so much for what you're doing, and thank you so much for coming here and talking to me and our audience on such a difficult topic.
Yeah. No.
That was Stefan Romaniw. He is the General Secretary of the Ukrainian World Congress and Chair of the International Holodomor Commemoration Committee. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned with UATV.